Yeah, it's part of his, tough love self-help routine. Stand up straight, clean your room.
Don't tell on the priest.
Don't tell on the priest, but also don't be a victim. And basically don't assert your minority status and say that you're disadvantaged because of white people, because that really upsets incel Kermit. I mean, Dr. Jordan Peterson.
I also had contradictory ideas that I think were more a function of my clinical training. And there were two of them that I'd like to discuss with you. I mean, the first is, when you think about yourself as a 14-year-old, you think about that 14-year-old as yourself. You don't necessarily think about that 14-year-old as a 14-year-old. And, when you remember your 14-year-old self, and then you go out and you see some 14-year-olds, it's actually quite a shock, or it can be quite a shock, because 14-year-olds are often a lot younger and a lot more clueless
than you remember
yourself being.
I think I know where you're going with this, and I.
Well, and so
go ahead.
Well, because the second part of what I thought was that, and this is the incredibly tricky part of this conversation, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, one of the other things that got you in real trouble, apart from the fact that you wouldn't name the person that you interacted with, your abuser, so to speak.
So to speak, the person he's trying so hard here to not just call this what it was, assuming that Milo's telling the truth, which, he has a history of lying, but this doesn't really fall into the scope of things that I think the guy's going to lie about. It's not like sort of in his, we'll call it his lying wheelhouse. But Jordan Peterson is trying so hard to not call this what it is, and it's bizarre. I don't know. Like, what do you think's going on here?
I don't see a problem with Milo thinking that he wasn't victimized, but portraying this dude as not having done anything wrong is a problem.
Or maybe we could say Peterson's minimizing the wrongdoing here.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's giving the priest the benefit of the doubt, possibly because of his office, right in front of the adult who, some years ago was the victim, even if he doesn't want to identify as a victim.
And even if it's admirable that he doesn't play the victim. This is like telling somebody who was raped that it's admirable that they're not playing the victim. Right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I guess there's there's something to be said for being like empowered and not getting past it is a bad way to say it, but being able to live a fulfilling life after having suffered trauma, right? There's something to be said for that. But I think part of that path, and most people in Jordan Peterson's field of psychology would probably tell you that part of it is like accepting it, making it a part of who you are, understanding the experience and understanding that it traumatized you, and then being able to think about it in those terms, and then let some of the pain go through maybe therapy or through, functional relationships that have happened prior to, or through things that you're passionate about, just improving your life and things that would make your life better anyway. There's something to be said for moving on is the wrong word, but there's something to be said for being able to live a productive life after trauma. And I think that he's doing a really bad job of saying that here, because that's kind of what I think he might be trying to say, but because he's too smart or something, he can't say that.
Yeah.
I don't even get what he's going for, like, politically, because usually when he takes weird stances like that, he's trying to be political. But what is he, like, is he trying to say that statutory rape isn't a bad thing? Is that what he's trying to say?
I would say that, there could be an argument made where if the person believes they're consenting, it's far less traumatic than if the person does not believe they're consenting in this scenario, right? Like
it can still be very traumatic later on in life, though.
Oh, of course. The violence would increase the trauma, but the lack of violence doesn't mean that it's not traumatic.
Yeah.
Like, of course.
I agree.
Like, of course, like, not all of what we would call rape and sexual assault is necessarily violent in the way that we think about violence, like doing bodily harm to somebody, like, just things like grabbing somebody's ass at a bar or whatever. That's sexual assault, but we don't really think of that in the same terms as if you like force yourself onto somebody, right? It's just varying degrees of being totally fucking shitty, right? But this guy couldn't even, I mean, I'm not, we come to this kind of mocking the idea of intellectualism, and I feel like my breakdown of something like that is far superior to this fucking brain genius's. And I don't know. So I guess we're going to skip ahead to about 31 minutes. This is a bit of self-diagnosis by Mr. Yiannopoulos. And of course, he's going to use this to suggest that other victims of similar sorts of sexual, we'll call them, as Peterson might say, experiences, interactions. And he'll definitely, he'll use those to say that victims of those interactions are, not
this
as
is
valid.
what I was saying he was going to get into. Or this is what I was guessing. Is he trying to say that that this should be legal?
That's the problem with Peterson, and we've talked about this before on the Matt Dillahunty episode, is that's a good question because nobody ever asks him, well, what do you mean? Like, what's the point? Like, he never gets to the point. He just leads you down a path and then blames you for going the rest of the way. For you taking me out of context. I gave you the map. I don't know why you went there. I gave you the train schedule. Why'd you get on the train? I walked you there. I walked you almost all the way to the train station, but I didn't want you to get on the light rail. Why'd you get on the light rail?
You should have divined my intent and known
that interview was that I thought, okay, this is really, and it's exactly what I would have expected to happen to someone like you, because you're so contradictory, is that you actually had a claim to victim status, which you then refused to capitalize on, and then which people refused to bloody well recognize in the midst of the interview. Like, the proper response to that interview should have been something like, well, here's someone who's talking about a case of child sexual abuse, but hasn't realized or recognized that they were, in fact, victimized in that situation and hasn't come to terms with whatever that might mean. And so
this
then
is not uncommon among people who have been through these experiences, because I have, since writing about this, I wrote a little bit about this in a short book I wrote about the Pope recently. And in the other things the brief mentions I've made of it since 2017, a lot of people have written to me with their own accounts. Mm-hmm. And this is not uncommon, I have discovered.
I'm sure it's not.
Who have experienced this sort of thing. And I guess there's some point in middle age where the penny drops. But yeah, I guess that there is a right and proper place to acknowledge and understand that you were a victim of something. Again, another thing that upset people, I think, another thing that didn't do many favors. But look, I am someone who will always just speak it as I see it. And that will have terrible consequences, and it will have great consequences. And, and that calculus will change over the course of the next few decades. But it wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me. And people find that a terrible thing to come out of your mouth. But it just wasn't. It's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And
so what's the worst thing? Okay, so I got a couple of comments on that. I mean, about 20 years ago, the American Psychological Association published a famous paper showing that most people who were sexually abused as children recovered with very little psychological damage. And that caused absolute outrage. The U.S. Congress, in fact, forced the APA, if I remember correctly, the American Psychological Association.
This is one of those unsayable truths, isn't it?
Well, they had to retract the article, even though
if you imagine the sort of trauma that we're expected to recognize that someone says they experienced because of mean words on the internet, and we have this economy based on what we all know is not true, but that, you know, these trivial, frivolous things can cause some kind of actual trauma. For an organization like that, or for someone in public life to come out and say this huge thing actually didn't cause me that much trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's not what the report said. I think Peterson's characterization of it is different than Milo's. What he said is that they recovered from the trauma, that the vast majority of people who had that kind of trauma recovered from it. It's recovering from something doesn't mean that it wasn't trauma. It means that you've worked it through via whatever means. Some people might even use drugs. Some people have worked it through because they've had positive relationships like I said previously. Some people have worked through it through friendships. Some people have worked through it through career fulfillment and realizing that they're fine and they're okay and that life can still be good. That's not the same as this wasn't a trauma. It's like not the same statement. You know, it's like saying that when you break your arm, or like I broke my wrist, right? And it hurt like fuck and I couldn't type and it was really hard to work. And my wrist works now and I can masturbate and
congratulations.
Can't switch hands without missing a stroke anymore. But but that doesn't mean I didn't fucking break my wrist and that it wasn't fucked up and that it didn't make my life difficult. It's a different example, but it's like it's saying the same thing, that this just isn't that traumatic. Well, no, just my fucking hand works fine now. And now I try to use vertical mice, although I have a regular one here because most people are like, what the shit is this thing? But like if I'm going to sit down and like do a lot of editing or whatever, I'll plug in like a vertical mouse so that I don't have to lay my hand flat because it's bad for your hand, especially since I broke it. But the idea that, first of all, them publishing that people work through it is a hopeful thing. And I'm a little bit alarmed that Congress would get their panties in a bunch about it. But we're also going on what Milo said, and I haven't read the report. But as Jordan Peterson described it, it said that they recovered, which is the point of therapy.
Right. But we have to remember that Dr. Peterson was also the one who thought, the Canadian bill, saying that people should use, the pronouns that people would like to be referred by, and he called it compelled speech.
Well, that's different too, because he was wrong. Like, that's the most important thing, is that it wasn't that the average citizen had to, abide by whatever someone said. It was that and there's a very similar law in New York City where that if you're, for example, their landlord, you can't keep using the wrong gender pronoun in an abusive way. If you're their employer, you can't do that. I think it probably also applied to university professors because the university is funded by the state, probably state university professors.
Oh, no.
And
I'm sure that shocked and offended dear I hate identity politics Jordan Peterson.
Well, to be fair, professor isn't really an identity if you ask these guys. People like me, we went over this last week. Identity politics, certainly it means something, but it doesn't mean people like me.
Yeah, it's the Ezra Klein just said it so beautifully. That's the privilege of the dominant class in society. They get to say your thing is identity politics, but my thing somehow isn't.
That's absolutely correct. So I'm going to scoot ahead again here to what is possibly the worst take in this video based on the notes you've left me here. This is about 39 minutes, 45 seconds. And Jordan Peterson asks if the priest turned Milo Yiannopoulos gay, because of course that's the obvious thing that happened, that the priest just turned him gay.
Oh my Lord.
When they run out of things to complain about, isn't it?
Okay, so let me ask you another personal question.
Stop typing.
Before I turn to something that will probably get me even more trouble. We'll see how that goes.
Well, you've subjected me to a therapy session. I think you can get yourself into trouble as compensation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there should be plenty of trouble emerge from this. So, well, look now. One of the questions I had, again, as a consequence of watching that interview, was because you portrayed yourself as an equivalent partner in some sense, and I thought, look, that means that Milo hasn't updated his memories. And they're still the memories of a 14-year-old, and that's a problem. And so you said that that's something that you've actually rectified over the last couple of years, and so that's a very interesting thing to hear about. But then I was also convinced that because you were still viewing what had happened to you through the lens of your 14-year-old, your iconoclastic and rebellious 14-year-old self, that it was possible, likely even, although not necessarily the case, that you underestimated the consequence of this interaction on your subsequent life. And so now you just told me that, much worse things have happened to you.
Yes, and you might be right about that, because in 2017, that's what I thought. And then in the course of writing the short Pope book I just did, I asked the question, could this have affected the trajectory of my sexuality?
Yeah, I wonder. That's exactly. Well, so what? In retrospect, now, what do you think? What do you think it did to you?
I don't think it made the difference between me being gay or not.
Okay, and why not?
Because I think that was already happening, and I think that I was aware of that, and that was very much. Some gay people talk about, being a little bit over into gay or a lot or whatever. Some gay men can countenance or imagine having sex with women. And for others, it's just like, in the way that straight men will talk about homosexual encounters. Now, I have had a few encounters with women, but they were very unsatisfying and miserable for both parties.
One of the reasons is because you were one of the parties. It's probably the reason it was unsatisfying for the woman. You're kind of an asshole. I just wanted to drop that in there.
Oh no, he's an what's the word? Iconoclast.
Oh man.
Well, to be fair to him, I've had an encounter with a man, and it was unsatisfying to both of us too.
I presume that he was gay or bisexual identifying, and you're mostly heterosexual.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was unsatisfying to him because, if I'm going to guess, it's because he could tell that you weren't that into it.
Yeah.
Like if you're having sex with somebody who's not that into it, unless you're a total fucking sociopath, used colloquially, of course, I don't want to be throwing around intellectual and psychological terms here. But the way we think about a sociopath, then you don't care because you got your rocks off. But yeah, if you look at sex as like an experience between two people where both people feed off of each other's energy and enjoy themselves, and some of the pleasure comes from giving the other person pleasure. Well, yeah, if somebody's fucking not into it, it's going to be crap.
Yeah. So, to his point, I could see, the neither party enjoying it, but that just goes to show that he was gay, and he said when he was 14, he was already going through that. And it's like, yeah, when I was 14, I knew that I was straight. By that age, what you're attracted to.
Even if you don't know that I don't know, that's a weird way to say it, but even if you're not like completely consciously aware of it, you will be checking people out, and you'll be doing things that you're not aware of why you're doing. And I could imagine at 14 that somebody could maybe, especially if they live in a really heteronormative society, because I think Milo's around my age, if I'm not mistaken. So depending on where he was growing up, it could have been very vastly different. Because like I grew up in the Bay Area, so coming out was kind of a no big deal kind of thing. But if I lived in Tuscaloosa, I could still be in the closet right now, right? For all we not maybe to my friends, but I wouldn't be on a stream with my face out there talking about being a gay person. So, and I think he might have been from London, so I think it was probably a little, if I'm not mistaken, he was in London, so it was probably a little easier than if he lived somewhere we might call a very Cockney part of Great Britain, which would be great if Milo talked that way. That'd be hilarious.
Oh man, if he had a northern accent.
Oh yeah. So we're gonna let this ride a little bit more here.
Few encounters with women, but they were very unsatisfying and miserable for both parties. And I think I'm quite. I don't. My hunch is, and I can't provide any evidence, but my hunch is that this did not make the difference.
Okay.
I think that. Like everybody, the mixture of nature and nurture in my case was probably swung over in that direction by a lack of good male role models in my relationship with my mother.
No.
Oh my God.
Bullshit.
Bullshit. Like, I got to tell you, like, and this is just an anecdote. I don't really talk about my mom maybe a little bit more on the air, but as far as male role models go, I got a good one, and I'm gay as the day is fucking long. My dad is a good person, and there's nothing, even to this day in adulthood, that he would not sacrifice for myself and my sister. If we needed things, not wanted things, needed things, he would sacrifice his time, his resources, his money. He would sacrifice everything also for my mother. And so this idea that it's a lack of positive male influences also, is his tongue out?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was trying to decide if
the way he licks his lips is pretty weird. He like sticks his tongue all the way out.
I wonder
is he showing off?
Hey, he said he doesn't like pussy. What the fuck? Well, I mean, I guess you can eat a man. Nope, never mind. That was
going there.
That was very heteronormative of me, and I'm very sorry. But I think my identity, funny enough, lets me hit a little bit of a pass on this.
God, hit play.
So this is really hard. I don't want to spend any more time on this because Milo's like Jordan Peterson is trying to get him to say that he thinks that this experience of being abused made him gay.
But he's saying it's
not true.
It's nurture. He said it was a combination of nature and nurture. And it's like, really? You think if you had a dad around, you would be straight? Because like everyone who had a dad around is straight, right? And everyone who didn't is gay.
It's just he's basically saying it's not the result of that trauma; it's the result of a different trauma. Yeah. Which means
there is no correlation between whether you have a good male role model and whether you turn out gay.
And whether or not you have a good male role model is also like very subjective, right? Like somebody who vehemently disagrees with us about like the world. I mean, we all have little places we don't all agree, but for the most part, we kind of agree about how we see the world. Otherwise, we'd kill each other during these live streams, right? But somebody who sees the world very differently than me might think of good male role model as something completely different. Maybe that strong father morality type is a good male role model. And to me, that's a shitty male role model. And the friends I know who had dads like that now, that I'm still in touch with, have horrible relationships with their dad because of that. Because they're of my generation where we don't place as much value on that kind of strong father morality. And so
you mean the kind of like beat you with a belt?
Just the father knows best thing. I don't know if it's necessarily abuse. You can be that. You can still have that sort of strong father mentality and never have struck your kids, right? I mean,
like the very strict parent,
or just father knows best. Like even if mom's right, father knows best. Even if the kids are right, father knows best. And that kind of thing. So if you asked me what a good male role model is, I'd point to somebody like my dad who's very accepting, wasn't super harsh, but certainly made it clear when we were coming up that certain things weren't acceptable. But then would take the time to explain why if we didn't know, and then wouldn't like take your fucking games away from you and shit. Be like, hey, next time you do that, there's going to be some consequences. This isn't a super big deal, but you can't act like that. It's going to cause you a lot of problems and you got to stop doing that. I see that as a strong male role model, and somebody else might think the belt is a strong male role model. And so the idea, it's like sort of like we were talking about with the IQ test, where the way you collect that data, it's going to be all self-reporting and very subjective in the first place. It's not the same problems as with the IQ test, but it's still the way that we get to the result is going to be such that it's going to make the results mean a lot less because of how we got there, I guess.
Yeah, I think we always hear this in the corporal punishment debate over raising kids, because there's always these guys going, yeah, my parents used to beat the hell out of me. I turned out all right.
It's like, well, no, you're an asshole.
Right. And everyone around him is like, yeah, right, sure, you turned out okay. Yeah, sure, buddy.
So I have a quick example of the difference in parenting, and it's from some friends of the family. Well, my mother and the matriarch, the mother of that family, are friends. I wouldn't say the rest of the thing is family friends. Why is there always a fucking bug when we're streaming? Anyway, the cameras aren't up. I'll kill the bug in a minute. I think last week I killed one in this laptop during the stream. fucking guts are like.
I remember that. We just slowly closed it on the bug.
Its guts still, it lives on the H key, I believe.
we do not practice samsara here at Echoplex Media. We will kill a bug if it invades our territory.
So, but what I want to say is like, there's a guy, he's about my age, friends of the family, and their father was kind of this father knows best. And he's fairly successful in his career and whatnot, but I don't see him a lot, but every time I see him, I just feel like I have less and less in common with this guy because of how because of his upbringing and how it was different than mine, specifically how his dad behaved. My mom and his mom are fairly analogous in their sort of approach to things, and this is why they get along so well. And and he would say that he had a good role model as a father, and I offered to fight that guy when I was 16 when he said the word faggot at dinner. And so I think that he's a bad male role model, and I probably should have fought him at 16. I might have got arrested, but it would have been a fucking great story, and I could have got that expunged because I was under 18. So this idea of a strong or a positive role model, how the fuck do we even decide what that means? So it's like, it's meaningless anyway, right? Because it's going to be self-reporting.
And there is no correlation anyway.
Right. Even if people think they had a good relationship with their dad, they're not less likely to be gay. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. As far as I know, the only correlation between being gay and something else is the more older siblings you have, the more likely you are to be gay.
That's funny because a lot of the gay people I know are the oldest.
Well,
that's my experience, though.
It's just a general correlation, not 100%.
Right. And it's, again, correlation doesn't mean causation. And my personal experience, just maybe because of how old my parents are, the social circles I ran in, the people I knew because of who my parents are and whatnot, they were all sort of the same age. Like some of the people I met growing up, my parents and their parents were the same age. Maybe they had kids around the same time. And that's my sample set from the people I knew when I was younger. So if some of them were gay, most likely they were going to be the oldest just because they were like in my peer group because of how old my parents are, because they had me in their early 20s like a lot of people their age did. So that's just my anecdotal experience. So we're going to move on.